Hello, welcome to today's edition of Daf Yomi, Daf 23, Amud A, and let's dive straight in. So it says, Amar Rabba de Kesava Rabbi Huda. Rabbi said, Rabbi Huda holds that in any case of any mixture that consists of a substance in contact with the same type of substance as well as another type of substance, the halacha is to disregard the same substance, considering it as though it were not there. In the same event that the different type of substance is more than the first substance, the different substance nullifies the first substance. In the case of the Mishnah here, the handful of the meal offering is mixed with other types of meal offerings that comprise a greater quantity of oil. The oil of the handful is disregarded, and the flour of the handful, which is present in greater quantities than the oil of the other meal offerings that is absorbed in it, nullifies the oil of the other meal offering. That oil is now considered to be one of the oil of the handful, and therefore the oil of the handful is increased and the handful is unfit. It was stated that the Amoraim disagreed with regard to the halacha, where one added oil to the handful that is removed from the oil meal offering of the sinner. So what's the footnote? Tomesh de minchas chote sheshimno. If oil was added to the handful that is removed from the meal offering of a sinner, it's unfit. This is according to the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan, and since in disagreement between Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish, the halacha is according to the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan, and that's from the Rambam, Sefer Gemor, Sefer Avoda, Hilchot Pesula Mikdoshin 11:10, which does not include oil. Rabbi Yochanan says it is unfit that, and Reish Lakish says the halacha of the meal offering itself is to wipe it, abam nisho, in the remainder of the log of oil that remains in the vessels that were used previously for other meal offerings. And the priest then brings it up and burns it on the altar. This is done so that the meal offering will not be completely dry. The Gemara asks, but isn't it written with regard to the meal offering of a sinner, he shall put no oil upon it, neither shall he put any frankincense on it, in Leviticus 5:11. How then can any oil be added? The Gemara answers, that verse teaches that one should not designate oil for it. What does that mean? Shelo yitba lo shemen. Rashi explains that this means one may not apply oil to the sinner's meal offering before the handful is removed, but it's permitted to add oil to the handful itself. This is in keeping with the continuation of the Gemara. Others explain, in keeping with the straightforward meaning of the text, that this means that one should not bring oil especially to accompany the sinner's meal offering, but it is permitted to add oil that is left over from another meal offering, or unconsecrated oil, obeying the Gershon, Moa, Hagol, and the Grid. Technically, the Gemara means that one may not add to an entire log of oil, as this is the amount added to other meal offerings, but there is no prohibition against adding a small amount of oil, and that's in fact Emma's explained Rashi. In any event, according to Rabbi Yochanan, it's prohibited to apply even a smaller quantity of oil, although it's uncertain whether the prohibition applies only to the addition of at least an olive bulk of oil or any quantity, and see 60a for that. As one doesn't have oil for the other meal offering, but the meal offering of a sinner is not rendered unfit by the addition of a small amount of oil. Rabbi Yochanan raised an objection to Reish Lakish from a Brighton to Sefta 4:4. In the case of a dry meal offering that was intermingled with a meal offering that was mixed with oil, the priest shall sacrifice it. Rabbi Yehuda says the priest shall not sacrifice it. What's the footnote there? No yakriv. The objection is not clear, as the opinion of Reish Lakish seems to accord with that of the first Tana of the Bible. Rashi explains that the first Tana holds that the meal offerings shall be sacrificed only because items that ascend to the altar do not nullify one another, so the oil in the mixture is ascribed only to the meal offering into which it was initially mixed. In the case discussed by Reish Lakish, where the oil was added directly to the meal offering of the sinner, the first Tana would hold that the meal offering should not be sacrificed. And see Rebbeinu Goshen Mor Hagola. What is the Bible not referring to a handful of the meal offering of a sinner that was intermingled with a handful of the meal offering, demonstrating that the oil invalidates a handful of meal offering of the sinner? Reish Lakish responded, no, the Bible is referring to the meal offering that accompanies the libations brought with the offerings of bulls and rams, for which 2 log of oil is mixed with 1/10 of an ephah of flour. They became intermingled with the meal offering that accompanies the libations brought with the offering of sheep, for which 3 log of oil is mixed with 1/10 of an ephah of flour, as the former is considered dry relative to the latter. Rabbi Yochanan objected, But another Braita teaches this explicitly as a separate halacha. As with regard to the meal offering that accompanies the offerings of bulls and all rams that became intermingled with the meal offering that accompanies the offering of sheep, and the dry meal offering that was intermingled with the meal offering that was mixed with oil, the meal offering shall be sacrificed. Rabbi Yehuda says, it shall not be sacrificed. Therefore, the latter case must be referring to the meal offering. Respected responded, the latter clause is explained in the first clause of the Braita, teaching that the reason one may not offer a meal offering that accompanies bulls and rams and intermingle with the meal offering that accompanies sheep is because one may not offer a dry offering that is intermingled with one that was mixed with oil. Rabbi raises a dilemma. In the case of a handful whose oil the priest squeezed onto wood, what does that mean? Tomer shemiza shomno al gaba azim. If the oil from a handful of meal offering was squeezed out onto a bone and the bone subsequently descended to the altar, it should be returned to the altar, since it is uncertain whether items that are contagious to offerings are considered to be part of the offering. And his ruling here is based on his version of the text, in which Gemara is discussing oil that was squeezed out onto a bone, etzem, and not onto the wood, itzim. Etzem, bone, itzim, wood. According to the Rambam, the Gemara's question is whether oil that descended from the altar must be returned to it. Since halacha is that a bone that descended from the altar is not returned to it, see the Vacham 685b. Due to uncertainty, he ruled that it should not be returned, since consecrated property should not be denigrated by not being returned to the altar. See Mishnah and Makei Chorchas. Rashi and Ravid have the standard version of the text, in which the Gemara is discussing oil that was squeezed onto the wood. Rambam says, "I've heard him 3:17." And afterward, he placed a handful on the wood to be burned. What is halacha? Are substances that are contagious to items that ascend upon the altar considered to be as part of the items that ascend upon the altar? According to Rashi's first explanation, the Gemara's question is whether the oil is considered to be part of a handful if it was squeezed from the handful onto the wood, and then the handful was placed on the wood. Just the fact that the two are contagious suffice, or does the fact that the oil is no longer absorbed within the handful mean that the handful is missing its oil? Similarly, Tosfot explained, and the question is whether the oil is considered to be part of the offering since it is not extant but absorbed into the wood. Others explain that the question here is not whether the oil is attached to the handful, but whether the wood is attached to it to derive it. According to all of these explanations, it is clear that if there is no attachment to the handful, then the handful is lacking and unfit. In which case, the oil that was absorbed into the wood and is contagious to the handful of the meal offering is considered part of the handful, or are they not considered to be as part of the items that ascend upon the altar, and the oil is not viewed as part of the handful, and therefore the handful is missing oil? The being said to Rashi, it is not the same disagreement as the dispute between Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish. It was stated with regard to one who offers up outside the temple courtyard a limb that contains less than half an olive bulk of meat. If one sacrifices outside the temple courtyard the limb of an offering that contains less than an olive bulk of meat, but the offering's bone completes the measure of the offering of it to an olive bulk, he is liable. This is according to the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan. Since in a disagreement between Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish, the halacha is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan, and from the Rambam Sefer Road, Hechad Ma'aseh Kabbalah, 1910. But the offering's bone completes the measure of the offering to an olive bulk. Rabbi Yochanan says he's liable, and Reish Lakish says he's exempt. Rabbi Yochanan says that one is liable because he holds that substances that are contagious to items that ascend upon the altar are considered to be as part of the items that ascend to the altar. Therefore, the measure of the bone is added to the measure of the meat, resulting in a total measure of an olive bulk, which is the measure that determines liability. As Reish Lakish says that one is exempt because he holds that the substances are contagious to items that ascend upon the altar are not considered to be as part of the items that ascend upon the altar. Since less than an olive bulk of the meat was sacrificed, he is not liable. Rashi responded, Rabbi's dilemma can be raised according to Rabbi Yochanan, and Rabbi's dilemma can be raised according to Reish Lakish. The circumstances in the dispute are not the same as Rabbi's explanation and Rabbi's dilemma, so their opinion in that case may not be applicable to this one. Rashi elaborates. The dilemma can be raised according to Rabbi Yochanan, even though he holds that the bone is considered to be part of the meat to complete the measure of an olive bulk. As Rabbi Yochanan says his opinion only there, in the case of bone because the bone is in the same type as the meat, i.e. it is from the same animal and therefore considered to be part of the sacrificial meat. But in this case of oil, which is not part of the handful type as the handful, is not considered to be part of the handful, even if it is contagious to it. Or perhaps, according to Reish Lakish, he said that it's ruling only in the case of the bone, teaching that it does not add to the quantity of the meat. The reason is that the bone is able to be separated from the meat, and if it is separated, there is no mitzvah to return it to the fire. Therefore, he views it as distinct from the meat. But in this case of oil, which is not able to be separated from the handful of the meal offering, it must be burned together with the handful. He will not hold that the oil is viewed as separate from the handful. Or perhaps there is no difference between the case of the bone and the case of the oil. Rabbi Menachos and Reish Lakish would have the same opinion respectively in both cases. The Gemara comments that let me just stand unresolved. A teiku. Mishnah. Shetei Menachos shelo nikmadu v'nis alchuz zeh bezo. In a case of two meal offerings from which a handful was not removed and that were intermingled with each other, Shetei Menachos shelo nikmadu v'nis alvu. In a case of two meal offerings from which a handful was not removed because that became intermingled with each other, if one is able to remove a handful from each separately, they are fit, and if not, they are unfit. That's from the Rambam Sefer Avodah 11:29 with each other. If the priest can remove a handful from this meal offering by itself, and from that meal offering by itself, they are fit meal offerings. But if not, they are unfit, and the handful of each meal offering must be taken from its original source. In the case of a handful that was intermingled with a meal offering, from which a handful was not removed, in the case of a handful that was intermingled with a meal offering from which a handful was not removed, one should not burn the mixture on the altar. If the mixture was burned, the meal offering from which a handful was taken satisfied the obligation of the owner, and the meal offering from which the handful was not taken does not satisfy the obligation of the owner. That's in the Rambam Sefer Avodah 11:30. The priest should not burn the mixture on the altar. And if he burned it, this meal offering from which the handful was taken satisfies the obligation of the owner, and that meal offering from which the handful was not taken does not satisfy the obligation of the owner. If after it was removed, its handful was intermingled with its remainder, this Avev Kumsa Bis Yareha V'chulu. If after the handful was removed, it was intermingled with the remainder of the meal offering, or if the remainder intermingled with the remainder of another meal offering, it should not be burned on the altar. If it was burned, it satisfied the obligation of the owner. That's in the Rambam Sefer Avodah 11:30. With the remainder of another meal offering, the priest should not burn the mixture on the altar. But if he burned it, it satisfied the obligation of the owner. Chitza says the meat of unslaughtered animal carcasses is nullified in a larger quantity of meat of a slaughtered animal. So what does that mean? Nevela betela beschuta. If the meat of an unslaughtered animal carcass is intermingled with the large quantity of meat of a slaughtered animal, the meat of the animal carcass is nullified in the meat of the slaughtered animal. Does not import impurity by carrying. Impurity by through contact. Although it does impart impurity by carrying, in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yossi ben Chanina in Chapter Bracha 23a, the reason for this halacha is that meat from a slaughtered animal cannot attain the state of a carcass. The animal carcass meat can attain the status of a slaughtered animal, since when the carcass rots to the extent that it is no longer edible, it loses its impure status. Therefore, it is nullified in a larger quantity of meat of a slaughtered animal. This is in accordance with the opinion of Hista. The writer explains that the entire discussion here is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, but according to the rabbis, a substance in contact with the same type of substance is nullified in all cases, and that's in the Rambam Sefer Tahara Kechasha Havat Hatumot 117. Although meat from a carcass generally imparts impurity, if one touches the mixture of the two meats, it does not become mutually impure, as the carcass meat is considered a different type of substance from a slaughtered animal, and is therefore nullified. This is not considered a mixture that comprises a substance in contact with the same type of substance, because meat from a slaughtered animal cannot attain the status of a carcass, and it is therefore viewed as a different type of substance. By contrast, if meat of a slaughtered animal became intermingled with a larger quantity of meat of animal carcass, the meat of the slaughtered animal is not nullified in the larger quantity of meat of the carcass, as it is possible for a carcass to attain the status of a slaughtered animal with regard to the halacha of ritual impurity, as it can lose its ability to transmit ritual impurity. This is because when a carcass rots to the extent that it is no longer edible, it loses impure status. Halacha that the carcass meat has the ability to attain the richly pure stages of meats of a slaughtered animal renders the two meats of the same type of substance. The mixture retains its status of intermingled carcass meat and the meat of a slaughtered animal, and Rabbi Hanina says the opposite. Any small quantity of an item that can possibly become like the item that is present in large quantities is not nullified when the two are intermingled, but any small quantity of an item that cannot possibly become like the item that is present in large quantities is nullified in a larger quantity. Accordingly, a small quantity of slaughtered meat is nullified in a larger quantity of unslaughtered carcass meat. Since the meat of the slaughtered animal cannot be like the animal carcass meat, but a small quantity of animal carcass meat is not nullified in a larger quantity of meat of a slaughtered animal, since it can lose its impure status and become akin to the meat of a slaughtered animal. They will ask, in accordance with his opinions, Rabbi Hanina and Rabbi Chitzah state opinions, if the opinions are in accordance with the opinion of the rabbis, it's difficult. Didn't the rabbis say that it is in the case of a mixture of items that ascend to the altar, that the different components of the mixture do not nullify one another, but otherwise a substance in contact with the same type of substance is nullified. Therefore, in any case where the meat of a slaughtered animal becomes intermingled with slaughtered animal carcass meat, the smaller quantity is nullified in the larger quantity. If their opinions are in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, who hold that the blood of an offering is not nullified in the blood of a non-sacred animal, because the two are the same type of substance, this is difficult. That's the end of Amud A. Wish you a very good day and see you for Amud B. All the best. Bye.